All right. Well, that was an excellent newsroom huddle. You can see that taking a current event, like the announcement that we received today, can lead us to getting all different types of stories, ideas, and leads. And so, as always, I encourage you guys to stay abreast of the current events, not only for your current events quizzes on Friday, but also because it helps you generate your stories. And that really is a great transition for us into reaction features because reaction features rely very heavily on current events. So let's talk about where we've been and where we're going. So far, we've really done a broad review, an overview of what feature writing is like. We covered 200 AP style. We looked at how feature and hard news pieces are different. And you guys have already written 3 stories this semester. That's crazy. Like, I'm so proud of the work that you guys have already put in, especially in a difficult semester. You've already written your general feature, your explainer feature, and your human interest feature. So someone tell me, the difference between a hard news piece and a feature piece before we move into reactions.
I think that features typically involve a lot more like narrative, not just all facts when it comes because when it comes to hard newspaper pieces, you're answering the who, what, where, all that. But with features, it's a lot more um dialogue, if that makes sense.
Yeah, we rely very heavily on sources. That's certainly one aspect that features are different from, and allowing your sources to really tell a lot of the story. How else are they different?
They draw in more emotion.
Good. So they really rely on emotion. Very good. What else?
They're really story based, like Zoe said,
Yeah,
instead of
they have more of a
storytelling.
narrative, creative
Mhm.
structure. Instead of our inverted pyramid style, we can really organize them into different types of structures. Myra, did you have one?
Um, I was gonna say like feature stories are kind of like a mix of the facts and then people's opinions.
Yes. So we're really trying to present different types of perspectives and not just the hard news facts of the story. Excellent. Well, our reaction features rely on all of those elements of feature writing, but reaction pieces are really that nice blend between hard news and feature stories because reaction features carry on the facts based information to present a more in depth feature on that current events topic. And so it really allows us to break down facts and present larger issue based reporting. So they are usually more hard news in nature, where human interests can be light and fluffy. This person is doing this great thing for the community. A reaction feature really relies on some news based event, hard news based event, and how the community or the affected population is reacting to that. So, the main goal of a reaction feature is to deepen the reader's knowledge of a topic, current event, or issue that is ongoing. Our sources are obviously still important within feature stories, but we need a blend of these types of sources. Where hard news pieces typically rely on officials and experts, and more general feature stories rely on the affected community, we need all of those types of sources for a reaction feature because we need the hard facts, but we also need the reaction to those facts. And then the goal, of course, is to get a better understanding of a tragedy or a larger social issue for our audience in terms of a local perspective. So, localizing reaction features are particularly important for us because we need to make sure that the reactions reflect our local community and not just the general population. Because, of course, Montevallo is a different community than even Alabama, or other campuses. And so we need to make sure that we are really localizing our issues. Here's an example of a reaction piece. You may have heard that Governor Kay Ivey is considering whether or not to extend the mask ordinance for Alabama. right? And so this story that's on top is actually a hard news piece. It's giving us the facts about when the mask ordinance expires, what politicians are expected to do. But then the story below it would be a reaction feature to that hard news to say, here's what Alabama hospital experts are saying. This is their reaction to it. And by the way, you can, of course, find these slides in Canvas so that you can click on the hyperlinks and see them in full as well if we don't click on a story that you have more interest in. So reaction features, the particular challenge for these types of features is to explain a large scale issue on a simple enough level for our readers. We need to make it interesting, and not all hard news is interesting, right? Sometimes we don't tend to care about the Alabama legislature on a day-to-day basis. Well, reaction features take that piece of information that can be kind of dry and boring and brings color and life to them by presenting the community and the way that it is affected by that news. We also need to make it simple enough. So a lot of social issues are very complex. So it's really synthesizing that information and bringing it down to that third grade reading level where very complex topics become explained through anecdotes or simplified ways of writing. We also need to make it objective, which can be very difficult in a reaction piece because a lot of these pieces rely on political or controversial topics. And so we may have an opinion about whether or not UM should come back in person in fall, but we need to set that opinion aside as journalists and writers to present an objective stance and perspective on that news. And then, of course, we need to make it balanced. And so that is a subset of objectivity. It's kind of under the larger umbrella of objectivity. But finding balanced sources is really important in reactions because we want to ensure that not just one reaction is being exemplified or expanded on more than the other reaction. So finding that balance can be difficult too. So we can take a very complex topic like a race movement, the Black Lives Matter movement, the protests that happened after George Floyd's death, and really synthesize it to show here are the updates of what is happening. Here's how the nation reacted to it. And here's how it's actually affecting the communities that are experiencing that. And so that's this example from Politico that I pulled yesterday. In order to find a reaction story, we have been really doing this all along, right? With our newsroom huddles. You did it this morning in your newsroom huddle. You took a piece of current events news, something going on, whether it's in your local community, nationally, internationally, and then you break it down and see how it impacts different aspects of the audience. So for example, Zoe was telling us about the news that we got through our email. Well, then we were able to come up with a broad range of stories from that, right? We were able to think about how it might affect freshmen, how it affects people who are currently offline learning or online learning. How will they come back? We were able to get an economic story from that. So it's about taking a current event or social issue and really thinking about the various ways that it affects your local community. That means you need to know your target audience. So what's our target audience for Falcon News?
Students and faculty.
Students, faculty. Good, Myra. Terry, did you have one?
It was the same, students, faculty, staff, all that.
Yeah. The students who are in my 499 or 333 class, when we looked at what stories really do well in terms of analytics on our website and social media pages, what is another aspect of our audience we should consider?
Alumni.
Alumni. Good job, Brian. We have a very active alumni group, and they are one of the primary readers of our social media page and our website as well. So those are the different types of target audiences that we could have, and you need to know who you're really speaking to. If you're speaking on Coming Back this fall in person, you can even break it down in terms of those audiences. Here's how students react. That's one story. Here's how faculty are reacting. There's another story. Here's how it affects alumni, donations, finances, and bring it there as well. So knowing your target audience is very important in terms of finding a reaction piece. We also need to think about what are the current social issues that are really affecting our target audience that they care about. And this may not be something that they're excited to read about, like we talked about, just a second ago. Knowing what bills are in front of the Alabama legislator, you may not care about that as a student. But what you should care about are those things that will affect you later. If this passes, what does this mean for my community? Most of our, or a large part of our finances as a public university come from the Alabama legislature. And so keeping aware of those current events affects how much tuition you pay. It affects, the quality of education that you receive. And so making sure that you personalize these larger social topics to your target audience is very important in a reaction feature. We also need to know what news values are present. And with reaction features, because they are so timely and because they are based on current events, some of the news values that we would consider are proximity. We always want to be local. Conflict. Anytime that there's conflicts, we want to present the different perspectives that are present. The magnitude of an event, how large of an impact that has on our local community, and of course, timeliness, whether that's something that's going to affect them right now or not. So you can see an example of the reaction feature based on the Alabama legislature here. There are bills in front of our legislature that would make it illegal to treat transgender youth. And so AL.com has created a story that speaks to advocates for transgender youth and also presents the facts from legislatures about why they have proposed this legislation and what the issues are there as well. So this is something that our audience would care about, since we do have a significant LGBTQ plus community on our campus. And it's something that matters in terms of healthcare. So we could speak to our nursing students, we could speak to people who are in healthcare, and see how it affects them in that way as well. When we're talking about how we gather news for reaction features, it's very important that we research the topics that we're looking at. We need to know what that bill says. We need to know the hard facts of the current event that's going on. And then we need to kind of think about who are the communities affected. And all of that happens in the research process. So once you pick a topic based on the things that we just discussed, the first thing you should start doing is your independent research on how this story has developed, what kinds of communities will be affected, and then also where those sources would be for you as a reporter to get even more information. So it's very important that we make ourselves very aware of the topic that we're about to report on. We also want to make sure that we have some kind of current event to springboard off of, so that our audience is aware of the current event that we can then present the reaction to. And I think it was Olivia who said one of the most important elements of features is that they're emotional. And so the best way to connect a current event to your audience and make them really care about it is finding the emotion of the story. So here's an example from WPMI in Montgomery. They were covering the Anaya bill that just passed. And for those of you who aren't aware of the situation, this is Anaya who was kidnapped and later murdered by a man who was out on parole for kidnapping. And the judge wanted to keep him, keep the suspect in jail for longer, but because of the law, could not do that. And so, in the wake of this incident, Alabama legislators passed this law that will now give judges a better, more lenient or more leniency in knowing who to parole and not. And so, instead of focusing on those facts, what this news piece does is they actually go and speak to victims who and their families who are emotionally affected by this bill, who were advocating for this bill. So let's take a look at that. And y'all give me the thumbs up if you can hear it once it starts playing.
'Cause no one can do it like we do it, like we do it, like we do it.
Alabama's a step closer to signing the Nia Blanchard bill into law. This bond reform bill, passed unanimously by the State House, is named after the college student who was abducted from an Auburn gas station and killed 2 years ago. The man accused of murdering her was out on bond while already facing other serious charges. NBC 15's Justin Moore joins us now. Justin, this bill, if passed by the Senate, could give crime victims' families some peace of mind.
That's right. The bill is designed to stop the revolving door for some criminal suspects, just like the suspect accused of killing 19-year-old Langston Nicholson.
When the detectives walked in from the sheriff's department and said he was dead on arrival, I just really everything just kind of, it was like I was in a matrix.
Trina Nicholson says she wakes up each day to that nightmare, knowing her son, 19-year-old Langston Nicholson, who had a promising future, was gunned down in Sims a year ago.
I am in a sorority that I never wanted to be in. I never signed up for, and I really don't want anybody else to join.
The Alabama State student was home for the weekend to celebrate Mardi Gras when two suspects tried to rob him and his friend. One of the suspects fired a gun, striking Nicholson in his heart, leaving him dead. Deputies say both suspects were out on bond already for 2 armed home invasion robberies near USA's campus.
Violent crimes, if you will, to also make a person eligible to be denied a bond.
In Alabama, judges are only allowed to deny bond to suspects with capital offenses. Lawmakers are in the process of overhauling it with the Nia Blanchard bill. The bill named after another 19-year-old college student in Alabama who was kidnapped and killed by a man who was out on bond for other serious charges. If passed, it would give judges the green light to revoke bonds for violent crimes like rape, kidnapping, and murder.
Something very needed in the state of Alabama.
Sheriff Sam Cochran has been a huge supporter of this bill, although he says it could stuff an overcrowded jail system even more. It's a risk he's willing to take.
And I would rather see someone else be let out on bond than these serious offenders, arrested for violent offenses.
It will give families like mine a lot more protection.
All right, so
it's
you
now
can
up
see
to the state Senate
from that example that they take the facts of this bill and where it's at, and they present multiple perspectives, not only from people who are affected, like the victims' families, but also the expert of a sheriff. And notice that the sheriff provides multiple perspectives because he gives the caveat of, yes, this will lead to jail overcrowding. However, this expert believes that it's worth it. Right. And so you're getting to see the multiple sides of even a unanimously passed bill. You still get to see the pros and cons. And that's very important to show within a reaction piece. Now, another aspect to consider in terms of news gathering for reaction features is your sourcing. And of course, we've learned from our previous 3 stories, especially our human interest story, that who you speak to as a journalistic source is very important for a feature. Now, for reaction features, we really have to mix up the types of interviews that we get. We want to have the experts and the officials to be able to explain the issue from multiple perspectives. But then we also want to show those people who are regularly affected by what is happening. And so we want a nice blend of community experts, but then also experts of the topic or issue or officials from that topic. And really, we've talked about what kinds of quotes we want to use from sources. What are some of the primary reasons that we use quotes from sources in feature stories?
Expertise.
Expertise. What else?
Emotion.
Emotion. There are two more.
Their opinions.
Their opinions. Good. One more. And this is really what reactions are for. It's very similar. Who just said something?
Me. I said opinion.
Opinions and perspectives. So it's very similar to an opinion, of course, but a perspective comes from personal experience. So you're talking to someone who has experienced something and they're sharing their perspective of that experience, as opposed to an opinion, which just relies on that feeling. So very good. That's the primary reason that we would want to use sources for reactions as well. We need some expertise a lot of the times for complex issues. We need the emotion to make it interesting for our readers. But most importantly, we're looking for the opinions and the perspectives of those people who are affected by whatever event or current issue we are writing about. And of course, balancing these sources is critical, as I mentioned earlier. So if we have someone who supports something, then we need to find the person that doesn't support it. Even in a unanimous decision, like the one we looked at with Anaya, the Anaya bill, that is unanimously passing the House right now because there's no one who disagrees that this isn't something that we need. However, it's important to look at what the potential negatives of a situation are, even when the opinion is very strong for one category. We also don't want to oversimplify things and present things dichotomously, meaning that there's only two sides of an issue, because we know that there are often many perspectives and many different opinions. And when we oversimplify things, it can create a conflict that isn't really there, right? So let's take the example we've been working with this morning of returning in person in fall. You could say that there are people who support it and don't support it, right? And you'd be right. But then there's really that middle ground of people too, right? What could the middle ground of that situation be?
It could be kind of like, I guess, students that are on campus like me that are still doing online classes and they're having to transition back to in-person classes is kind of, I don't know, it's kind of iffy.
Yeah.
Like I don't 100% support it, but I don't know.
But you're not 100% against it either.
Yeah, I'm not against it. I kind of miss being in person, but then at the same time, I don't. So it's kind of,
exactly.
It makes sense. So I don't have to be here wasting tuition dollars. So I'm actually going to class now. So
yeah. So I think you're going to find a lot of great journalism happens in that gray space. But unfortunately, we have used the norm of balance to make two sides to every issue and only showing the extremes. So it's important that we also capture that middle ground, that gray space where we present, like Myra was just saying, where we have someone who's like, yay, more social life, but then, hey, I don't get as much flexibility within my course offerings. I'm kind of liking some of my virtual classes, so, or someone who's like, I really want to come back to learn in person, but I still have hesitancy in terms of whether I feel like it's a risk worth taking for my health. So I think that all of those perspectives are things we need to consider as we're writing reaction features. We also want to make sure that we're giving equitable voice to all communities. And this is really important for me, especially as someone who worked in the field for 15 years. Research shows that it's very common for journalists to interview people who look like them. And so since white males dominate our industry, the primary source that is often used is a white male. But that's only one community. That's only one voice. And so I want to challenge you as journalists to reach out to diverse sources, people who don't look like you, who don't share your opinion, because it will only bring more life and color to your story. And plus, you are helping our democratic appeal to give voice to the voiceless and represent those people that have often been underserved in our community as well. And so it's very important in reaction features in that research phase for you to think about, hey, who is the person that doesn't have as much access to a platform, to a megaphone to be able to share their voice? And how can I do that for them? And so I challenge you to really reach outside of your personal communities to get those different voices. And many of you have been doing that in your previous stories, and I'm very proud of you for that. So in terms of writing and what the actual feature looks like in terms of format, it's going to be very similar to the general feature formats that we used for our first story, except the lead needs to contain an explanation of the current event and showing its potential effects. So it's going to be a little more of a descriptive lead, most likely, where you're explaining the story and what has happened, what is prompting you to write this reaction feature. Another choice of lead style would be an anecdote lead, which is showing a smaller piece of the puzzle to explain the larger issue. So showing, the victim and his family to explain the larger issue of why this bill is necessary. So those are the two primary lead styles that I would suggest for your writing. In terms of your nut graph, that place where you're pointing the reader to why this is an important story, we need to show the effect on the readers. That's the primary purpose in your nut graph for a reaction feature, is showing how it will affect the community that is reading it. We also need to, within that nut graph, explain or summarize the different perspectives. So you may say something like, while some students are excited to return in person, there's also hesitancy for online learners. And that's a very brief description to point your reader to say, hey, I'm going to cover both of these topics within the paragraphs below my nut graph. When we're wrapping up our conclusion story, we want to point to the next steps on the issue. So if it's something that hasn't been decided yet, tell the reader, the audience, what those next steps are in terms of a bill or a policy. Where is it in the pipeline of lawmaking? And what does the timeline for that passing or not passing look like? In addition, if you're using an anecdote lead, you can also come back to that anecdote and wrap it up. So you noticed in the video that I showed you of the Anaya bill, we had our victim's mother as the last soundbite, so that we then come back to the story that we told at the beginning. So that's another option for your kicker or conclusion in your writing. Don't forget to write in present tense, even though the current event has likely happened in the past. You still want to write in the present tense because people are continuing to react to that issue currently. We also want to find the emotion and the passion of that story, find the people who are trying to make the change, who are really speaking out about that social issue. Emotion is very important in terms of making your reader care about this current event. And then work on simplifying issues to a third grade reading level. Think about your younger siblings or a niece or a nephew. You can always picture my crazy daughter, right? And act like you're talking about this issue to her or whoever that younger child is, so that it's not complicated to an extent where the average reader wouldn't be able to follow it. All right. So let's talk through some examples of reaction pieces. Here is one from the Alabamian, written back in January, of students who were protesting support for private prisons. So tell me a little bit about what you're seeing here and why you think that this is a reaction feature. Can y'all see? Y'all see the article? All right. So what does the lead look like? What kind of lead is this?
Would it be anecdotal?
So remember, an anecdote shows a smaller section, like tells someone's smaller story to represent the larger issue. So I think that this one's pretty fact-based. In a historic move in July of 2020, the United States Department of Justice declared the Alabama's men's prison system unconstitutional. So what kind of lead would that be?
So it would be descriptive.
It's a descriptive lead because it's telling us what has just happened. It's giving us that who, what, where, when, right, of the story. And then we get the opinion of a nonprofit. So who would that fall in under the source? What type of source is Alabama Appleseed in this case?
An official source.
This is an official or an expert. This is someone that is very passionate about this topic and they know a lot about this topic. So this would be our official, right? We have quotes from the DOJ decision. So we're pulling from sources that are fact-based. And then we also get later some student perspectives. So this is the student group, Students Against Prisons, and we see why they care about it, right? Here is an entire quote from a student about why she is passionate and believes this perspective. If you read through this article, and again, you can always come back and click on this link to read through it more in depth, you'll notice that they present why private prisons are being proposed in our state and the argument for it, even though they are featuring the organization that's protesting it, right? So we're getting multiple perspectives here on why this is a social issue that matters. All right. Let's look at this article written by AL.com. So religious groups blast Alabama Senator Tommy Tuberville for rants about school prayer. So what kind of lead is this? Two groups that promote religious secularism are taking aim at Republican Alabama Senator Tommy Tuberville's inaugural Senate floor speech, in which the former college football coach advocated bringing God and prayer back into schools.
Would that be anecdotal?
So again, an anecdote would be the example from the Anaya bill that we watched would be anecdotal because you're taking someone's personal story to explain a much larger issue. What other type of lead could this be? I think this could fall under two types of leads that we've talked about in the past.
Could it be descriptive because it's telling the current, what's going on currently?
Yes. So I think this definitely falls into descriptive because it talks about, what the event that is prompting this reaction is, right? And notice in terms of digital formatting, don't you guys like that they used the hyperlink to then point us to the actual speech so that we can go back and reference what they're talking about? That's a great use of hyperlink there in the writing. Since it also brings in a quote from Senator Tuberville, this could also be known as a quote lead because it's bringing in his quote. But I think you're right, Victoria. I think it fits better in descriptive because it describes what the current event is right now. So then we get the president of Americans United for Separation of Church and State, their speech, and then notice that we get links throughout to different sources. So they're referencing this Pew Center survey, and they actually bring you to the Pew Center survey. So a great use of transparent writing there. We also have news releases that are hyperlinked. So this is a great example when we talk about needing hyperlinks in our story for doing that. So you can notice that they get a statement from Tupperville, who is the source of conflict here. They also get those that are against Tupperville's statements. So you get a full picture of what is going on in terms of reaction here. We also have this story about a medical marijuana law being passed in Texas. This is something that we are working on in the Alabama legislature as well. So let's look real quick at this one. I know we're wrapping up on time here.
Texas lawmakers are back in session, and some of the bills headed their way have to do with medical marijuana reform. One Cedar Park mother hopes her son's medical condition and his use of medicinal marijuana will help open eyes and minds as lawmakers debate the future of cannabis right here in Texas. Here's Darnisha Herring.
The idea that I would give my child marijuana? Are you kidding? That's not something I came lightly to.
A tough choice for Carissa Barenblatt, but it was tougher to watch her then 5-year-old child suffer from multiple illnesses.
He has a rare disorder called Fragile X syndrome. He also has hydrocephalus, so he's had a couple of brain surgeries. He has a primary immune deficiency, and he also has epilepsy.
A lot for a child to take on. By the age of 5, Max Barenblatt was prescribed at least 15 medications, including anticonvulsants for seizures, Xanax, and antipsychotic medication.
So he was self-injuring, which is, as a mother, there's hardly anything more motivating than seeing your kids suffer.
The Cedar Park mother and her son traveled the country seeking advice. A specialist in Colorado suggested medical marijuana for her 5-year-old through a special program. It changed their lives.
He takes this medication and it gives me my child back. He's much more verbal. He's more conversant. He can tell me how he's feeling and what he's thinking about.
Max is.
So here, what kind of lead would that be? It's finally okay to say the one we've been saying.
Anecdotal.
There you go, Terry. Good job. Why is this an anecdotal lead?
It's talking about one person's specific experience with a bigger social issue.
Right. So we're getting to see why medical marijuana could affect families in this community through the perspective of one mother's child, right? And so you're putting a personal face on a much larger issue, and that is what an anecdotal lead is. So good job, Terry, for getting that one. So you can see here, and if we watch the full 3:30 story, which what news station is running a 3:30 story at this, a 3-minute and 30-second story at this point? Whatever, it's probably sweeps, so it was probably a feature. But we get experts, we get senators, we get people who are worried about passing medical marijuana within the story. Lots of good representation there. And of course, we also watched the Anaya piece that does that as well through anecdotal. I encourage you to watch the 3340 piece because it is about an issue going on at UA's campus. We can see here that there is a campus organization who've started a petition to get free counseling services at UA. And so it presents the quotes from the student organization who wants to push this, but then also presents the perspective of the executive director of counseling services explaining why their fee is necessary. So now that we've looked at reaction features, now it's your turn. You guys get to write one. So that will be your next assignment. You have your assignment sheet, which also has the rubric at the bottom within today's module of Canvas. But just so you know, you're writing the reaction feature. It must be based on a current event or social issue that affects the UM community. It should be hard news in focus, and it must be important to students, faculty, staff, or alumni here at Montevallo. Curveball, I don't want you writing about COVID-19. And here's why. Because we need to challenge ourselves to step outside of current COVID-19 right now and think about broader issues. We've written a lot of stories so far about COVID. And while it is a huge overarching issue, there are many other things going on campus right now and in our local community that I think we can write about. So I'm going to challenge you guys not to pitch a story about COVID. Okay. 3 sources will be required. At least one needs to be an expert or official. Make sure you're following our organizational styles like we have been all semester, getting in an image, video, hyperlink. And please, as always, remain safe while reporting and follow your social distancing guidelines. The rubric is attached at the bottom, as always, of your assignment sheet. So 5 points to get the draft in, 10 points for your peer edit, 10 points for hitting your deadline, 10 points for formatting, 10 points for written in digital style, meaning video, hyperlinks, visualization, and transparency, 10 points for making it a reaction feature based on what we've talked about today and what is in chapter 2 of your textbook, and then 10 points for the professionalism of your writing, meaning objectivity and sourcing, and then 10 points for your AP style, grammar, spelling, etc.